All right, welcome to Lucia Capital Group Weekly, our weekly video. I'm Johnny Dean, and I'm filling in. Let's see, I'm filling in for host Ray Lucia Jr., who for the last few months has been filling in for co-host Rick Plum, who for a few months after that was filling in for normal host Ray Lucia Jr. Rick, do I have that right?
Something to that effect, yes.
Okay, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Well, you know, we're doing this distance thing and all that, and this is how we're doing our meetings. But anyway, we welcome you to this week's edition. Speaking of doing distance and all this COVID and pandemic stuff, we don't like to dwell on it too much, but we do have some provisions that we want to remind people about because we've been getting some questions on this. Now, first, for the people who don't know, Rick, you're a star, but I should just say right away that you're the Chief Financial Planning Officer for Lucia Capital Group. You're also the co-host of our long series of webinars, and of course, our weekly podcast that you and I do as well. What have I missed? I know you've got something else. 30 years in the business?
Coming in, yeah, something like that. I'm trying to do the math in my head, but yes, more than 30 years in the business now, 33.
I find that after 15 years of doing things, you just sort of lose track. You just say, I've been doing this for a really long time, which obviously you have. All right, so now, as I said, we've had some questions from people about these things called CRDs. I don't know if they know what they're called, but that's what they're called. They're the coronavirus-related distributions. Now, this is a provision of the CARES Act that was passed here not too long ago, Professor Plum. And what these do are allow for hardship distributions from qualified retirement plans. We're talking about your retirement plans at work, and we also include IRAs in these. So let's go down some of these because as I said, we do have questions for these. First of all, who is eligible for these coronavirus-related distributions, these special distributions?
Well, unlike the stimulus that went out to anybody, whether they had any financial hardship or not, the CRD, the COVID-related distribution, you have to be affected financially by this situation. So you have to be diagnosed with COVID-19. Your spouse, if you're married, would have to be diagnosed with COVID-19. Or you have to have experienced some kind of financial hardship, financial consequence. They don't even qualify it as a hardship necessarily, where you have a reduction in hours, you've been furloughed, you've been laid off, or you can't go to work because you can't get childcare and somebody's got to watch the kids. So it's a fairly broad definition of being affected financially or for the COVID-19. But if you do have the ability to claim that you've been affected financially by the COVID-19 issue, then you do have access to your retirement accounts that you might not have had in the past. And so whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, unfortunately, it may be the only thing you have available to you. And so you might have to do it. But you do potentially have access to accounts that you would otherwise not have had access to without penalty.
Yeah, and you said it's broad. It is. It's very broad. In fact, it's almost to the point where you could say, I have been affected, and they don't have the resources or the time to question it, at least not at this time. So,
right. We don't know exactly how they're going to monitor that, but some of it is self-certified. You just sign a thing saying I was affected, and then they can do it.
So now, under the old rule, I don't want to call them old rules, but because they'll still be in effect. But there are current rules, and then there are the traditional rules. Let's compare these two very quickly for the people who qualify. First of all, penalties on early withdrawals, the prior to 59.5 for most people. Let's talk about how that works first.
Right. There's two different sets of plans we're going to talk about: the IRA and or your retirement plan at work, your profit sharing plan, your 401k, things of that nature. With an IRA, we all know that if you try to access the IRA before you're 59.5, unless you're disabled, have passed away, or for certain other financial hardships, or even up to $10,000 for first-time home purchase, you received a penalty for taking money out of the IRA too soon. What this CARES Act has done is allowed you to access up to $100,000 if you are qualified, as being affected by the COVID-19. You can take up to $100,000 out of an IRA, obviously assuming you have $100,000 in the IRA, and you will not have to pay the penalty. Now, normally, if you take a distribution from an IRA before you're 59.5, you have the ability to put it back into the IRA to avoid the tax as long as you do so within 60 days, and you haven't done that within the last 12 months, or you don't do it again within the next 12 months. That 60-day rollover period has been extended. So if you qualify for a COVID-related distribution, you can take up to $100,000 out without a penalty. And if you want to put it back in, you have 3 years to put it back in, 3 tax years to put the money back in to an IRA and avoid the taxation. Now, the other thing is, if you're taking a large lump sum, some people will look at it and say, 100,000 is nice, but the taxes are going to kill me. And with a $100,000 distribution, yeah, the taxes probably would be quite high. But what this CARES Act has done is also say that if you take a distribution, we're going to tax you, assuming you don't put it back into another IRA, we're going to tax you over the next 3 years. So what they do is they take 1/3 of whatever you distributed and they tax it 1/3 in 2020, 1/3 in 2021, and 1/3 in 2022. And so just for easy math, you took $90,000 out and boom, you pay taxes on 30 of it this year, 30 of it next year, 30 of it the following year. That helps get away from some of that, what we call bracket creep.
Absolutely.
Where it may put you into a higher bracket down the line. Now, as I mentioned, you do have the ability to pay it back, and you don't have to pay it back ratably. You don't have to pay it back on a systematic payment schedule. You could pay it back, 2.5 years from now, almost 3 years from now. And if you do that, you would avoid the taxes. But if you're listening, you're going to say, wait a minute, I paid a tax on 1/3 of it in 2020, and I paid a tax of 1/3 of it in 2021, and it's 2022, and I'm putting it back in. What about those taxes? You would go back and amend those previous returns to show that it was ratably, you didn't have as big of a distribution as you had, and you would either recoup those taxes at that point.
Yeah, and so in some cases they'll just get rid of the penalty, and if you do it correctly or you want to pay it all back, you don't even have to pay the taxes in certain circumstances. But if you are going to pay the taxes,
it'll be taxable, but you avoid the penalty in all these cases. As long as you've qualified for the corona-related distribution, the penalty on up to 100,000 is waived, and it's per person. So husband and wife could each do it.
Sure. Here's the next one very quickly. Loan provisions when we're taking a loan, let's say, out of your 401k. How does that work? How is the old and how is it temporarily new?
Well, we were talking about the IRA and the $100,000 distribution. You can do the same thing with a qualified retirement plan. So if you want to take money out of your 401k as a hardship distribution, normally a hardship distribution has a 10% penalty. If it's a COVID-related distribution, no 10% penalty, same 3-year repayment, same idea of the IRA. But let's say you don't want to take the distribution and you say, I just need an influx now and then I'll be able to pay it back. Normally with a 401k, you can borrow up to 50% of your vested balance up to a maximum of $50,000. So if I had a total of $50,000 in my 401k, I couldn't borrow the whole thing. I could only borrow 25% or 50% of it, $25,000. With the new rules, I could borrow up to 100% of that value, 50,000, and borrow it all. And then I have basically 6 years to pay it back. I still have a 5-year repayment schedule, just like under the old system, but I can defer the first payment for a year. And if I have more than 50,000, I can take a distribution of up to $100,000 as a loan that I would pay back, and up to 100% of my vested account balance. So the old rules of 50-50 have been replaced by 100-100.
Yeah, and that's actually a very helpful thing for many people who need a lot of cash now just to get through. Some business owners or people who are doing things on the side, they may need that cash for now. They think they'll get it back within the next couple of years, but it's a good way to go. Okay, so let's kind of summarize here what you think might be some of the key provisions. First, on the retirement plan. On the IRAs.
Well, the withdrawal has to be taken in 2020. This isn't going to extend unless they change the rules again. This isn't going to extend indefinitely. These are not the new rules going forward forever. This is a 1-year issue, 2020 distributions. And the distributions don't have to be all at once. So if you say, look, it's kind of tight this month, I'm going to take 10 grand out. I think I'll get back on my feet and I won't have to take any more. And then unfortunately, we don't get the job back, whatever the case may be. There's no restriction on the number of distributions. It just all has to happen in 2020, and it can't exceed the $100,000 number. And it does cover most retirement plans. I mean, it covers 457 government 457 plans, TSAs, yep, profit sharing plans, money purchase plans. So it covers almost all of the retirement plans that work, and obviously IRAs. And so it is a taxable event, but it can be spread out over time. And you've got that 3-year period of time to repay it, or not, if you don't worry about paying the taxes. Now, the other thing, though, is remember that if you are taking money out of your retirement accounts, it's not there for retirement. And or if you pay it back 3 years from now, that money hasn't been in the plan. So if we get a recovery, it's not enjoying any recovery that could be happening over the next 2 or 3 years between now and when you put the money back. So sometimes you don't have a choice. It's the only money you got to take it. But you are, robbing from Peter to pay Paul, the old saying. So we do have to look at it. Now, I was listening to an advertisement for an investment that can't be done in a 401k. And this radio advertisement is talking about how you could take up to $100,000 out of your 401k and invest it in their program, and your 401k is still working for you. No. If I had $100,000 in my 401k and I borrowed $100,000 out of my 401k has one thing in it, a loan to me. The money is no longer invested in the investments in the 401k because they took it and they loaned it to me.
Yeah.
So I don't get to have my investments still working in the 401k and borrow it to buy into this crazy places program. So just to understand that you are giving up that opportunity cost that is inside the plan that may or may not happen with the investments that are in the plan.
Now, you mentioned you have normally you have 5 years to pay back any money in your 401k. You mentioned 6 years because one of the things that has changed is that you don't have to pay it back. You could delay for up to
the first payment for a year.
Right, and I think the loans have to be taken prior to September 27th of this year, at least under current law, the way it is now when we're recording this.
The distributions from the IRA are in 2020. The loan has to be done by September 27th, unless they extend that deadline.
So you would say that while this is a good thing to do, maybe look into other things first before you tap into your 401k for a loan or tap into the IRA. Is that right?
I would try to look into other things. Like any time before, we've talked about this. Is a loan from a 401k a good or bad thing? It is not. Some people say never borrow from the 401k. Some people say, hey, it's a loan, great. I look at it as what other sources of capital do I have? What other sources of money do I have? And what is the cost to me of taking that capital, taking that distribution, taking that loan, and evaluating whether or not this is the best source of capital. Unfortunately, what we're seeing for some people is it's the only source. And so they don't have a choice. But if I had an equity line, then the difference between an equity line and a 401k loan is I got to start paying the interest on the equity line right away, where I don't have to make a payment on the 401k for a year.
Yeah.
So maybe you can do a little bit of both. So there's lots of things that you could potentially plan for if you have availability of other sources.
Yeah, and I would suggest too that if you're working with an advisor, especially like Professor Plum or any one of our Lucia Capital Group advisors, talk to them first to see if there are other options that may be better for you, and there may not be, but at least talk with them, have that conversation. These are really important points that you've brought up here, Professor Plum, and I want to remind people too that even if you personally may not need to tap into your retirement plan or your 401k or take a withdrawal or a loan for it, there's a good chance that you probably know somebody who does, but they don't know about these particular provisions. I mean, Professor Plum, you could be 35 years old and not have to worry about it at the moment, right?
Right. There is no age restriction. Obviously, if you're over 59 and a half, the penalties don't apply anyway. But no, there's no age restriction. The only restriction is, do you have a COVID-related issue to be eligible for one of these distributions or loans?
Yeah, so talk to your financial advisor about this. So, but if you know somebody who does, I would encourage you to pass this video along to them. Tell them about it. Tell about some of these provisions, so at least they can get a lot of this important information. So, okay, we're out of time. Professor Plum, that's great stuff. Again, I know there are a lot of provisions in this thing, and if you have any questions about it, you can certainly reach out to us here at Lucia Cap, luciacap.com, our website where you've been. You can also give us a call, 800-644-1150. Talk to Professor Plum or any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors about this. Find out if it's right for you. It may or may not be, but certainly check with your advisor. And I want to remind people too, and I said, Professor, you and I are on podcasts. Don't forget to listen to our podcast. You're the co-host. I'm the co-host. We've had some great ones the last couple of weeks. I think I said we raised the bar a lot. But if you want to join us on our podcast, subscribe to it. You can find the information there as well. We talk about a lot of this stuff in depth. Go to our website and you can subscribe over there. Professor Plum, I thank you so much. I thank Ray Lucia Jr. too for allowing me to step in. He was unavailable today. Don't forget, as I said, check out the podcast. You can also find our weekly videos in your inbox. For Professor Rick Plum, I thank you all for watching. My name is Johnny Dean, and we'll talk to you again next week.